we'll get started here in just a moment, but before we do, a little housekeeping. If this is your first meeting with us, welcome. Quick rundown on how we'll handle each case today. We'll have staff present the case, then we'll have an opportunity to ask them questions before inviting the applicant up. They can share additional details with us if they would like. Then we'll open up a public hearing for each case individually. I'll announce what case we're working on at that time. You can come forward to the mic, state your name for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Following the closure of the public hearing, we'll have the applicant come back up, address anything that was raised during the public hearing that they might want to, and then we will have any final questions before we discuss and make a decision, and then move on to our next case. Before we get started, any potential conflicts of interest on today's cases, commissioners? None? Okay. And just a note, in case you're here for this case, the case at 337 through 345 Summer Ave Northwest has been withdrawn, so we will not be hearing a presentation or making any decisions on that case today. All right, let's get started with 3325 Plainfield Ave Northeast.
So the applicant proposes demolition of the existing improvements on this site and construction of a new gas station and convenience store with 24-hour operation and alcohol sales. Gas stations in this zone district, the modern era neighborhood commercial, are a permitted use, but developments of an acre or more, which this is, are subject to site plan review. The proposed alcohol sales and the 24-hour operation are both special land uses. So it's special land uses for alcohol and 24-hour sales, and then site plan review for, because the site is over an acre. The site is on Plainfield, which is a state road. It's controlled by MDOT. The site is about 1 3/4 acre in size. It's currently improved with a shopping center. You may recall, some of you that were on the commission, that this same site was before you once before for consideration of a self-storage facility at the site, and that was denied. The site has frontage on 2 streets, Elmdale, which is the street, it's not named here, to the north, and then Plainfield. We've got about 300 feet on Elmdale and about 80 feet on Plainfield. In front of the site is an oil change business, and I think currently there's a lot of cross access between the two, and there is an easement for the oil change to cross onto the subject site. So all surrounding properties immediately surrounding our commercial. We do have some mixed density residential on the other side of Salerno. So that might be something to keep in mind relative to the 24-hour use in alcohol sales. I'll come back to this slide if we need it. So the applicant is proposing to demolish all the existing improvements on the site and construct a new 5,600 square foot convenience store with vehicle fueling, alcohol sales, 24-hour operation. 18 parking spaces are proposed. The 3 curb cuts that are proposed are in the same general location as what is there now. I do want to point out that because pardon me, Plainfield is a state road, the MDOT actually has control over this curb cut and whether they find it appropriate or not. So ultimately, any details about this curb cut will be under the review of MDOT. Relative to the site plan and layout, because the property has frontage on both Plainfield and Elmdale, it is considered to have 2 front yards and 2, well, it has front yards on both street frontages. All the other lot lines are considered sides. The proposed layout meets or exceeds all the minimum requirements for setbacks of the building, as well as for the fuel canopy and the tanks. The one element that I'd like to bring up that doesn't meet our requirement is the trash enclosure. Between the building and the street is considered a front yard, and the trash enclosure would need to be relocated. I did include that as a condition of approval if you are amenable to this use. One other element of the site plan that I'd like actually the applicant to discuss a little bit is the optional expansion of the canopy and the addition of 2 dispensers. I'm not really certain what the intent is there, if they are, if that's a future expansion or if it's something that they're thinking about right now. The parking, the proposed number of parking spaces meets the parking requirement. Green space and landscaping appear to be met, and all that would be confirmed at LUD's permitting. I'm going to skip on to the building elements. The proposed building, it's a single-story flat roof building. It's about 18 feet in height. The fuel pump canopies echo the design of the building, which we do want. There are no materials requirements in this zone district, or expression line or building entrance orientation requirements. One thing that we do need to look at, though, is transparency. On the 2 street-facing elevation, the east elevation facing Plainfield and the north elevation facing Elmdale, they both meet the transparency requirements, or I should say they actually exceed it, particularly the east elevation facing Plainfield. This zone district requires 30%. They're proposing 65 on the east elevation and 46 on the north. In contrast, the applicant is proposing no windows on the other 2 elevations. That's partially because of operational issues, such as, you know, the location of the coolers, walk-in coolers. So one of the elements under consideration by the Planning Commission today is if those if the lack of transparency on those 2 sides is warranted. Relative to facility operation, the store will include food preparation and sales, a seating area, and a retail area for typical convenience store items. It does meet the cash register viewing area, and the building has been reviewed for SEPTED compliance, crime prevention through environmental design by our police department and our SEPTED specialist, and the building and the site are found to be appropriate. I do want to go back. Oh, and this slide here shows the location of security cameras. So that was part of the SEPTED review. So I do want to go back to the site plan now and talk a little bit about traffic and circulation. So the applicant did have a traffic impact study prepared, and the traffic study concluded that a traffic signal is warranted at Elmdale and Plainfield. And MDOT does concur with that conclusion. However, because there is a traffic signal at Plainfield and Salerno, which is about 600 feet north, they will not approve a traffic signal there. The study also recommended the construction of a full-width southbound deceleration lane on Plainfield Avenue, just north of the proposed access to Plainfield. MDOT also concurs with that. There may be some issues with the construction of a deceleration lane in that location. However, there might be some, sloping grades, and also the fact that there are two existing curb cuts that service the oil change business. So we did include that as a condition of approval. Ultimately, it's up to MDOT, but MDOT, in order to allow the curb cut to the south here, they do want this deceleration lane. So those are some things that would need to be further explored by the applicant with the owner of Big Rays. They'll need to do some further engineering. So if the Planning Commission is amenable to this use, this is included as a condition of approval in the resolution. In the revised version of the staff report, we did recommend the inclusion of a traffic diverter or a pork chop that would result in, right out traffic movements only, along with the closure of this access to the Wendy's restaurant property to the south. After further discussion and input from MDOT, we don't find that recommendation is necessary. So it is on your resolution draft, and you may eliminate that if you wish. So if you do have questions about any of these traffic issues, we do have John Bartlett, our traffic systems engineer from MDOT, here today that can answer your questions better than I can. So I'll wrap it up by saying signage is not part of this consideration today. Any signage would need to meet the requirements of the MONC zone district. I have not received any input from any of the surrounding property owners or the Creston Neighborhood Association, which did receive a postcard. So in sum, we're looking at a special land use for 24-hour use and alcohol sales, and site plan review for a site of over an acre in area. Do you have any questions for me before I turn it over to the applicant?
Elizabeth, with the MDOT recommending that you don't put the traffic diverter in, is it possible that signage could be used instead of physical installation to encourage traffic that might want to head north to go to Elmdale for a left turn?
Interior to the site, I suppose that could be done.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure the best place to put that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, a sign on, like, going out to Elmdale, they could direct folks to go up to the light at Salerno if they want to make a left turn. That's probably going to be the easiest place,
Okay.
so.
Any other questions for Elizabeth at this time?
Yeah, I have one. So there is a transit stop right in front of the site as well, and so I'm wondering if the applicant would be, in addition to working with MDOT and the city regarding any deceleration lane, if they would have to coordinate with the Rapid on impacts to that stop and the route as well.
Well, gosh, I am embarrassed to admit that I didn't notice that stop. Where is it?
It is right in between the two curb cuts in front of the oil change place. Right, yeah.
So absolutely, that would also be a consideration.
Okay.
Any other questions at this time? All right, thanks, Elizabeth. I'll invite the applicant up if there are other details you'd like to share with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Eric Lord. I'm with Atwell here representing Come and Go in this project. Not a whole lot more to add. I think Elizabeth did a great job with breaking down our application here for you all. Happy to answer any questions that you have. One item that did come up was regarding the optional expansion of the dispensers there, which is really, that was just shown for our internal purposes, just to show the room that exists on the site. We have no intention of expansion of the dispensers that are proposed, so we could delete that from the site plan for sure. Outside of that, I'm just really happy to answer any questions that you all have, so.
All right, commissioners, any questions for the applicant? Anything?
Could you give us your just overall explanation of flow on the site and particularly the connection with the Wendy's property to the west?
Well, so, there's two connections to the Wendy's there to the south. There's one, along our east side and along the west side of that exists today that would remain. We would propose for that to remain moving forward for our operation, which we think is a good thing because, although we do have curb cuts there, it would allow, if somebody is at our store that would like to visit Wendy's, they don't have to go back out onto the street, back on again. And the same with Wendy's. If somebody is there and realizes that they need to get fuel or some convenience, that's there for them too. So from an access management standpoint, we think that's a good thing. And I'm happy to hear that the discussion of removing that connection is no longer part of the discussion, because for us, we think that's pretty important. But, I think in general terms of site circulation, the building currently eats up the property from north to south. Now we have much better circulation around. Obviously, we're going from a 20,000 square foot building down to our 5,000, so there's much more room for circulation, which we think works quite well. There's a little bit of uniqueness with the road network around us, but what we've found is a lot of the traffic that visits our store is capture traffic from vehicles that are already traversing the area, that know the area. Traffic seems to find its level quite a bit, so although I'm not opposed at all to wayfinding signage internally to direct some folks to help, I think it's a great suggestion that we're happy to look into on where most appropriate and that sort of thing. But I do think that a lot of folks are going to figure out if getting to that signal is what is best for traffic flow entering, exiting the site. I think that they'll kind of figure that out on their own too, but certainly some wayfinding I think is a good suggestion.
Can you respond to the need to relocate the trash enclosure?
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, no issue on our side. We've looked at a couple different locations right now. On the southwest corner we've got a spot there that I think would fit well with it and operate well, gets it out of the front yard setback. So that's probably the one that makes the most sense for us.
Any other questions at this time? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today about this case at 3325 Plainfield Northeast, please come forward, state your name, and share your brief thoughts with us. Yeah, you can come to the mic, and if you want, you can address the question to us, and then we can get an answer for you after the public hearing. Yeah, why don't you come up to the podium? You can share your name with us and just direct your question to us, and then they can respond after the public hearing.
My name is Michelle Carlson. I'm just kind of curious, after what I heard, there was some green space that was mentioned, but it was kind of vague. What did that necessarily mean? Is there a certain requirement, like 25%, 30, or what does that look like? Again, the lighting of the place, I saw that there are apartments. I know they're not really close, but how does that lighting play out? Is that a requirement? And is it really bright too? Does that type of stuff being taken into consideration when you build something in a new place? Do you want to present it well enough that people are going to want to go there and go the loops or make the left turns or whatever that they want to do? Those were just kind of the thoughts I had as I was hearing her talk.
All right, thank you. Anyone else on this case today? All right, I'll close the public hearing. Kristen or Elizabeth, do you want to speak to the two requirements that she brought up?
I can speak to them, and Elizabeth can supplement if I miss anything. So yes, there is a green space requirement. All newly developed properties in the city of Grand Rapids have a minimum green space requirement that must be met in order to be approved. That amount varies depending on the zone district that it's in. In this particular case, in this zone district, they are required to have a minimum green space for the lot area of 15%. I believe Elizabeth's staff report had calculated an estimate of 18%, meaning that the amount of green space shown on the submitted plans would meet our minimum requirements. In addition to green space, there are also buffer requirements or landscape requirements that can be counted as green space, but there's requirements, for example, that parking lots cannot be closer than 5 feet to the lot line, and then that 5 feet must be used for perimeter green space around the property. So and then there's also a tree canopy requirement that must be met. So there's a variety of elements that go into, the umbrella of green space. Relative to site lighting, that is also something that the ordinance does require. Typically, that is a requirement that is more thoroughly vetted during our permitting process than with the Planning Commission, although it's certainly relevant, I understand, to your consideration. So for context, the ordinance would require site lighting to be full cutoff fixtures so that the light is directed immediately below the fixture. We do make sure that there's no spill over the lot line and that there's a maximum amount of light called foot candles about how bright the site can be. And part of that is because we want to make sure that there's no light spill that affects adjacent properties, but also if lights are too bright, it actually has the opposite of being safe because it creates blind spots on properties because your eyes can't adjust. So that was all taken into consideration when we wrote the code requirement. And so there is a maximum amount of foot candles that can be used. It is brighter at gas stations because of the nature of the use, but it is still well below what are traditional or accepted light levels through there's a National Society of Lighting, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of them, but they provide a lot of guidance to local municipalities about light levels and what's appropriate based on the use and the location. So I don't believe that you have all the details here in your packet, but as customary, the planner that reviews the plans prior to permitting would require the photometric plan as well as the details of the fixtures themselves. Hopefully that helped answer the questions. Okay.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for the applicant? I'm wondering if Mr. Bartlett might be able to come up and just high point your analysis of the traffic study, considering some of MDOT's conclusions, particularly that a traffic signal would be warranted but not recommended because of the nearby light. How should that be handled? How can, what's our responsibility with that?
Just before John answers your question, I just want to, I think Elizabeth misspoke. Mr. Bartlett is a traffic engineer for the city with the mobile GR department, not MDOT. So I'm sure Carol would have caught that, but just for the community. You did. But since he's up speaking now, I want to make sure that it's
Did
clear.
you want a
who
career
John
change?
is.
And
No,
new
don't
employer?
offer that.
I'm very happy with where I'm at.
Thanks, John.
So
Sorry,
yeah,
Elizabeth.
for the record, my name is John Bartlett. I work for the Mobile GR department here at the city. I'm a traffic systems engineer. I did review the traffic study for this proposed development as part of this process. So I'll touch upon the signal first. So there are a number of things. So first, the traffic signal has to meet a warrant to be considered for a traffic installation. In this case, the numbers used to meet that warrant are projected based on the trips generated by this development. So MDOT is sort of in the traditional camp where they typically wait for the traffic volumes to exist before they do something like invest the capital to put a traffic signal in. That combined with the fact that there's one 600 feet away, which is closer than a DOT considers acceptable traffic signal spacing. So it's harder to platoon vehicles between those two signals in both directions, depending on geography or topography of the roadway. It might be difficult to make sure you can discern between the two signals as you approach them, so you don't want to see a green further ahead while you've got a red nearby. So there's some safety considerations that they have concerns about with that spacing. So combined with the fact that these are projected volumes and not existing volumes, at this time they would not approve the installation of a traffic signal based on the projection. This isn't to say that in the future, if those volumes exist or these problems exist, they wouldn't consider adding a second traffic signal if they felt it was necessary, or another consideration could be that they move the Rupert signal to this location if they feel it's more appropriate. So this is not closing the door on a signal being there in the future. They're just saying at this time they're not going to say that Come and Go can go build a traffic signal to address this concern. So the second part of that for your information from my perspective is the applicant alluded to this a little bit, but gas stations are what I would consider an opportunistic use. I don't wake up in the morning and say, I need to go get gas across the city because that's a destination. This is people passing by the site on the way to and from work, or residents that live very close nearby that are used to those configurations. So 20 hours a day, those left turns are probably not problematic. During the peak hours, these people that pass the site every day get used to that. They tend to not make those difficult left turns. In the case of this site, that's a northbound turn. There's a speedway 1,000 feet south of here that they would have to pass that they can make right in, right out movements to then come make a left here. I just don't think people are going to make those poor decisions during the peak hours. To add to that, we have an example of another Come and Go that we're evaluating on 28th Street. So the volumes on 28th Street are to the level where they've went and counted a speedway nearby, and that people are not making those left turns. Their pass-by percentages are drastically in favor of a right in, right out movement. So especially for a use like this, those left turns being difficult over time just become eliminated, and it only becomes a right in, right out use. So that's why my statement was I'm in general agreement with their analysis. Some on-site signage to let users know that they can go to the Salerno signal to make those lefts would be helpful. But beyond that, I think everything else is in order.
Thanks for that. Do you know what the traffic count at that signal is? And what's the likelihood that it might justify the move?
I don't
To
off the top of my
Elmdale.
head know the count there. I will say the likelihood of them moving it to this location is limited because the access to the east at Rupert is more significant as it goes into those neighborhoods. It provides access further east than this location would. So from an overall network perspective, that's probably unlikely.
Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Bartlett?
I actually just have one about the statement you made that you thought that the right in, right out would just sort of like happen naturally. So are you not recommending a diverter, or are you in favor, or can't you say?
I'm of the stance that you need to let MDOT make that decision of what that configuration is. I don't think that, given the number of driveways in this area that are already full access, I don't think one diverter is going to be that impactful. And you are restricting that access for the 20 hours of day when it's not a problem. So I think given the fact that during those busiest times that people will regulate themselves, that sort of restricting it for 20 hours a day is not necessarily the best course of action.
All right, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
You.
All right, discussion, commissioners?
I guess I'd like to know what we think about that, about the decision-making capacity of our general public in a very high-traffic area, if that's something that we feel like we need to enforce or control or just let handle itself. I'd like to know what you guys think about that.
Well, first of all, MDOT has the jurisdiction, and I do agree that if you've got a gas station on this side and a gas station on that side, you're going north, you're going to pick the one on that side and the opposing, and I was glad to hear that that tends to be what happens. The other thing is if people are using it because it's open 24 hours, that would be, late at night or something like that when traffic would be considerably less. So overall, I approved the configuration. I think, Plainfield is wrought with many, many curb cuts that make, difficult, but that's not in this process, and I think that what they have suggested is thoughtful.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to have one of those signs maybe going toward the Elmdale side, like for easy left, like go, I've seen those on 28th Street in a few different places. So I think that would be good. I do want to make sure that the transit stop is considered when we talk about the deceleration lane and the impact that will have. Otherwise, yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with this use in this location and the hours, and I appreciated Kristen's description about the lighting requirements and plans, and know that will all be settled in the permitting process. I had one other thing I was going to say, and now I lost it.
Transparency.
Oh, sure. Okay. That wasn't what I was thinking about, but we should talk about it. Yeah, why don't you give your thoughts on the transparency?
On the topic of transparency, I think that what they propose seems justified to me based on their maximizing the interior layout, especially noting that while on two sides there's no transparency proposed, on the other two sides there would be considerably more than is required. I find that a healthy trade-off in this case.
I didn't ask this question, but that very large asphalt parking lot in front of the site, which could at some point be redeveloped, might change. This is more of an observation, I guess, things. But for right now, that's the way it is, so I'm in support.
Perhaps some comments on the record. I didn't hear much conversation about the sale of beer and wine. That is part of the special land use. I think Elizabeth did a good job outlining the fact that we've got the operations plan as well as the crime prevention plan that has been reviewed, and they are subject to the crime prevention ordinance. But I didn't know if the planning commission had any thoughts about it being a 24-hour store with the sale of beer and wine.
Yeah, I think as we've seen the development of new gas stations for the first time that I can recall, kind of more regular development of new gas stations, I think that the focus has shifted to more of a convenience store model where that's their opportunity, not necessarily cannibalizing each other's gas business. But I do think that beer and wine sale is a part of that attraction for folks who are already stopping. I don't have a problem with it. I think, the 24-hour nature of it, they're still restricted by law to which hours of the day they can sell that. So whether that's at 1 a.m. or not, I'm not all that concerned at this location. Use-wise, I don't love it, but to Mr. Bartlett's point, I think there's a tendency for folks to not want to cross traffic, and even though there is a gas station close by, which I would normally say I wouldn't support this use here. I think that the amount of traffic on Plainfield might justify it and help with some of the flow of traffic and making those safer intersections. This is a challenging area, though, considering the speed folks traveling. I feel like it goes downhill and then uphill again before the highway, and cars do fly through here, and it's kind of on a curve a little bit, and so visibility is tough. So I do hope, to the point of people making the right decisions, I'm hopeful that that's the case, because visibility isn't perfect here and speeds are a challenge. So I suppose we'll see. I guess my concern isn't to the level where I wouldn't be supportive of this, but that's where I'm at.
I mean, to your point, the last traffic count we have is from 2018, but it's over 37,000 cars a day that pass this area, so.
All right, would someone like to make a motion?
I'll take it. I'll make the motion. I may be,
Those considered.
you're going to have to help me along with this one, yeah,
I was
okay.
just thinking.
I apologize. Sorry, a little confusion up here. Now, therefore, it be resolved that the Planning Commission approves a special land use and site plan review request of Come and Go LLC, Ryan Halder, for approval to operate a 24-hour vehicle fueling station and convenience store with the sale of beer and wine for off-site consumption at 3325 Plainfield Avenue Northeast for the following reasons. Excuse me, the proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will allow the establishment of a retail use and gas station in a manner supporting economic activity while being sensitive to the surrounding uses. Maintain and enhance economically vibrant as well as attractive business and commercial areas. Provide reasonable accommodation for growth and development. Excuse me. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standard of section 5.12.08.e because all elements of site design are harmoniously and efficiently organized in relation to the size and type of lot, character of the neighborhood and adjoining property, and the type, size, and proportions of the buildings. And driveways and other elements are designed to promote safe and efficient movement within the site and its access points. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and use of the neighborhood, adjacent properties and the natural environment, because the site remains a commercial use in a commercial zone district. Auto-oriented uses are expected in the Muncie Zone District.
The proposed use will not have adverse effects on the neighborhood because the building and entrances will be appropriately oriented, and adequate parking is being provided. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future use or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic noise, smoke, odors, glare, and visual clutter, because the use is expected to be patronized by drive-by traffic, and the site will be constructed in compliance with current lighting and standards. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because adequate pedestrian facilities will be provided. The proposed use will safeguard the health, safety, and general welfare of the public because the site is currently improved with public infrastructure capable of handling the proposed use, and any private infrastructure will be provided at the developer's expense. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city, because the use is not anticipated to result in nuances that require enforcement actions. The proposed redevelopment will enhance the viability of the business district in which it is located. Given the character, location, development trends, and other aspects of the neighborhood, it is demonstrated that the area underserved by the proposed use and that the proposed location for alcohol sales will demonstrably be an asset to the neighborhood because, as proposed, the use will be unique as compared to existing uses in the neighborhood, since there are few other establishments in the vicinity offering packaged alcohol for off-site consumption. The use or change in use as constructed and operated by the applicant is compatible with the neighborhood because no concerns have been expressed by the nearby businesses or residents. The use as proposed to be operated by the applicant will not have any or minimal negative secondary effects on the neighborhood because an adequate operations plan and training will be in place. The use is subject to SEPTED ordinance. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions set A, approvals. That the application and plan submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approval plans except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or as amended in this resolution. That the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. That this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future signs shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. That the Land Use Development Services, LUDS permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. That any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by Planning Commission. That the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. That this approval shall take effect 16 calendar days after the date of the Planning Commission's decision. That the amount of transparency on the west and south building elevations are approved as proposed. That the outdoor displays of merchandise shall be directly adjacent to the front of the building and shall be limited to typical service station merchandise, e.g. road salt, vehicle fluids, beverages, and ice. That the trash enclosure be sited in a location meeting the requirements of Section 5.2.13. That if required by MDOT, a southbound deceleration lane be constructed pursuant to a design approved by MDOT and the City of Grand Rapids and should consider the rapid stop. Everyone comfortable with that? And that the use shall comply with the requirements of the Crime Prevention through Environmental Design SEPTED ordinance.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and support. Any final discussion?
Did we want to say anything about working with city staff or coordinating with city traffic safety about wayfinding or, and if no, that's fine. But, and then I guess related to the transit stop, maybe, maybe suggesting that they coordinate with the Rapid themselves? I don't know. I know I put my thumbs up, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. I've been texting my mobile GR friends, and they're, Josh, do you want to maybe speak to that? Yeah.
Hi, Josh Nermer from the Mobile GR Department as well as Mr. Bartlett. Since it's a MDOT road, we can work and coordinate with the Rapid, and we have a good working relationship, and we've been able to facilitate those types of moves in conjunction with private property owners. I don't think necessarily to hold it up and put the onus on the business owner themselves for doing the coordination. It would be the three of us to be able to move the bus stop. That's just my recommendation as a staff person. I think it's an onus on the private property owner that they don't have control over.
Got it. That's sort of where I was at as well, cumbering the owner with that. I think it's more appropriate for the city to be pushing that forward, which we would do in partnership.
Any other discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Our next case is 1109 Michigan Street in Northeast.
Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 1109 Michigan Street Northeast. The applicant is requesting an amendment to a special land use and site plan review to eliminate a previously approved condition of approval regarding permanent cross-access to Fuller Avenue. The applicant this matter was previously postponed on October 27th, and the applicant is again requesting that the matter be postponed one more month. That would be to the first meeting in January. And I would actually like the applicant to, further explain to you why the matter is requested for tabling.
So Jurgen Dietrichson, architect for the project, speaking on behalf of the owners. The reason why we would like to make a further extension is because we've actually been working on this project for quite a while. We first got approval in January of 2020. But we've been working closely because it's a landlocked site. The need for access across an intervening property to get to and from the property that we own. So what we would like to do is actually nail down some final agreements that we are really close to, but could not have ready for today's meeting with the property at 1121. That's the one to the south, which is the main connection to Michigan Street for us. The agreements are going very well, and the two lawyers are working out some final details, as typically what happens is just working out the details. So what also will happen, and what we would like to present when we finally can get back in front of you, hopefully in January, is a better cross-access agreement for both properties and an improvement to the site plan as a result of these long-going but well-earned discussions.
All right, thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this time? No? Okay, thanks. Since this was postponed and the public hearing was left open, I will open up the public hearing now. So if you're here on this case, you want to add some comments to the public input that's already been put on the record, you may do so now. So this is for the case at 1109 Michigan Street Northeast. You can come forward, state your name, and share your thoughts with us. All right, I'll close the public hearing. And then commissioners, are we amenable to postponing again?
Yeah, I'd make a motion to postpone to the January 12th meeting.
Support.
Okay, any discussion on that? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Thanks. Our next case is 220 Quimby Street Northeast. Elizabeth will, no, Laura will walk us through this. Great.
The applicant of 220 Quimby Street Northeast is requesting a waiver of over 50% of the required parking spaces for a proposed mixed-use development to be located at the corner of Quimby Street and Plainfield Avenue. Because this project may be developed by right, other than the requested parking waiver, the Planning Commission's review will be limited to the parking waiver request. A special land use may be approved to reduce parking requirements above 50%. This site is not included in any area-specific plan, and the future land use map designates the area as a traditional business area. The surrounding zoning, it's surrounded by mixed-use commercial, low-density residential, and there's a city parking lot just to the south of the project. The site is approximately a half an acre and is currently vacant. The proposed project on the site is a 4-story, 45,000 square foot development to be known as Hillcrest Apartments. It will have a 1,000 square foot commercial space on the ground floor, potentially to be used as a coffee shop, and 72 dwelling units. 61 of the 72 dwelling units are considered micro units. Our ordinance defines a micro unit as a residential unit no greater than 475 square feet. 28 parking spaces are proposed on-site, as well as an indoor bike storage room on the ground floor for up to 60 bicycles. There are 63 parking spaces would be required for the combination of all the residential units and the commercial space. As stated, 28 spaces are proposed, which is 44% of the required spaces. The applicant has been in conversation with Mobile GR and intends to lease up to 40 spaces in the adjacent lot just south of the project. However, because these lease agreements are month to month, it's not a permanent agreement. These 40 leased spaces cannot be considered as part of the parking waiver. Therefore, a waiver to reduce parking by 35 spaces, 56 of the required spaces, is requested today. Regarding bicycle parking requirements, with micro units, the number of required parking spaces can be reduced by a half a space per unit as long as 2 bike storage spaces are provided for each unit. This would require 122 indoor bike spaces, plus the additional spaces required for the property and the commercial space. That would bring a total of 136 bicycle spaces. For uses other than micro units, after the first 20 bicycle parking spaces are calculated, 50%, the remaining bicycle spaces are calculated at 50%. So applying this to the number of spaces would bring the total number of required spaces down to 78. An exterior bike rack will be required for this commercial space at permitting. Therefore, the Planning Commission should determine whether the provision of the 60 indoor bike spaces plus the addition of a bike hook in every unit meets the intent of the ordinance for the bike parking requirement of this project. The zoning ordinance allows for several methods to reduce or waive parking, including on-street, district parking, and transit. As stated, there is a city public parking lot to the south of the project that includes 104 spaces. There is on-street parking in the vicinity, and to the west, there is another city lot with 92 parking spaces. There is also a rapid bus stop right on the street in front of the building, going both northbound, and there's one across the street southbound. Letters of both support and opposition have been received. There is large general support for the project as a whole. There's some support for the waiver, and there is some neighborhood concern about the impact on neighborhood parking, particularly for the residents on Buffalo Street. In sum, the Planning Commission should consider this request to reduce required parking through a parking waiver of 56% of the required parking spaces. Does the Commission have any questions for me?
Thank you. Any questions at this time for Laura? All right, thanks. I'll invite the applicant up if there are other details you'd like to share with us. Hi, thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time, and I'm honored to be here. My name is Ryan Talbot, developer on this site. I think the planning department explained what we're up to pretty well. The concept behind this development is really to maximize housing density on the site as much as we can. There's a housing crisis, and 72 units on half an acre is a pretty good amount of density there. Creston is I'm sure you've all been there. It's a wonderful neighborhood. It's aspiring to be more and more walkable and more accessible. And so the ethos of this building is really put as many people as we can into that walkable, transit-oriented neighborhood to continue to develop those goals and also put a maybe very small dent in the housing crisis that we have here. So I appreciate your consideration and happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Is there any research on these, on the owners or the residents using cars as their transit and the size of a unit?
I don't have any hard figures. Nobody lives there yet to tell you how many cars will be there. But certainly in this state and in this metro, cars are the dominant form of transportation. But you know, we're trying to fit as many spots on the site as we reasonably can without sacrificing housing units. That's really sort of the primary goal. So I couldn't tell you if it's 0.75 to 1 or what, but in the sense that we're building right on a transit line and we're encouraging as much bike parking, both in a secure bike room that's indoors, as well as, you know, I think people with like kind of fancier bikes, not me, but people with fancier bikes might want to keep them in their unit. We're providing, you know, bike hooks. We're trying to encourage alternative forms of transportation as much as possible.
And my second question then is, in that larger area, and I can't remember if I read it in the application, I know what the parking is behind it, but there are parking lots like within another block or so. Do you know how many like open spaces there are there, and are those available for overnight parking?
I can't speak to the regulations specifically on those lots. I know that the lot immediately to the south has a couple of spots that seem to be designated no parking from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m., but that it looks as if those signs are focused on a few aspects or a few areas of the lot, but I couldn't tell you for sure.
Our mobile GR director is here that could likely answer those kinds of questions for you if you would like.
Yes, thank you.
Is now a good time for that? Yeah, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as it relates to the East Creston lot, which is the one that's just adjacent to this development, there's 104 spaces. So currently we do sign it as no parking from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. We don't prohibit overnight parking. We only do that, and that's just for snowplow operations during the wintertime. That's really all it's for, and for street sweeping services and other things. We can modify that at any time as we need it. That's just the standard sign that we put into place. But as you know, snow events can be as little as a handful during the year, or they can be a lot of them. So that's what we use because we do them ourselves, or we also use a third-party contractor if it exceeds more than 2 inches of snow during any designated snow area.
There are other parking lots around there. Do you know what the usage of those are?
So the last time we did an official detailed analysis parking study was in 2017 for both the West Creston and the East Creston lot. What I will tell you is, though, we actually have full fiber optic real-time cameras at both of those lots. And so we actually regularly and routinely monitor them for a whole variety of things. But one of them is we do just basic space counts. There's no detailed, like not by hour, but approximately when we were looking at it over the last few months, it's about 30 to 40% occupied during its peak period. But for the most part, and so that's 90, I can't remember the exact count, it's 94 spaces in the West Crescent, and then it's the 102 in this lot. So currently, our departmental policy with our Mobile GR Commission is at any request from any adjacent property business, we can convert up to 30% of all of the spaces in any lot at any given time for permit parking, of which this development would qualify for that. And that would be 42 spaces in this current lot configuration. But the Mobile GR Commission at their discretion can increase that amount. There are also other operational considerations that we can look at for larger scale lots, which is implementing gate equipment for access control, for allowing for greater 24/7 access. In the current configuration, it's not a necessary investment in either of those parking lots.
Okay.
But should that become an operational consideration or issues with the adjacent neighborhood parking, that's something that we could look to do as an implementation thing as part of the operations for the business district. Then the other questions that I believe that were shared are related to on-street parking. I think it's Buffalo Street and some of the adjacent property streets. So the city and our department, we count every residential street in the entire city of Grand Rapids, and we do that once a year, and we're going to twice a year counts next year. And so all of that is included in a comprehensive database that we share with the planning department for the development of their staff reports. None of the areas in this proximity meet the threshold, which is you have to show that at the peak period at any given time during the day, it's 75% of the on-street parking is occupied. Now, we count this 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day, and we do it 2 times a day. We do it between the hours of 7 and 9 a.m., and we also do it at night, and I believe it's currently between 6 and 8. And we're looking at expanding that to more of the midday in next year's counts. But the preliminary analysis does not show at a very high level that there's any that are on the threshold of not being able to have the capacity to support additional parking. So if it did meet that threshold, we would work with, there's a whole process that we have in place that we hold a public hearing and it goes to the city commission to designate a new residential parking permit zone. And that's only after there's a public hearing and there's a whole process that's laid out for that. But if we did reach that threshold, we would go to that, and that costs people in the neighborhood $20 over the course of a year to be able to qualify for a residential parking permit.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today about this case on Quimby, please come forward, state your name, and share your brief thoughts with us. You can come forward, state your name, and share your thoughts.
I'm just curious, again, my name is Michelle Carlson. I'm just curious, what's the goal of this area? What is it that you want to have looked at? Do you need housing there? Do you need other types of businesses to bring in revenue to the community? I mean, so I'm not I mean, I know parking's an issue and traffic will be an issue, and it seems like a great idea. Not opposed, not a, I have no opinion right now. But I'm just curious, when you're brought these projects, what is the ultimate objective? When you look at these areas and you see a restaurant, a furniture store, a coffee shop, whatever, what is it that you all are trying to accomplish? And I guess that's something as I hear you all talk, and I'll understand it better, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But if there's a need for the area and the parking situation, needs to take a hit, those are those decisions. But I'm just kind of, that's where I'm at. When I hear stuff being done in Grand Rapids, how is that laid out? Obviously, I'm new to the Grand Rapids area, 3 years, so I'm still learning.
All right, thanks. Anyone else on this case?
Hi, my name is Gord Heisen. I am both a property owner and a business owner. I own Stone's Throw Furniture, and we own the property in which that business sits on. My concern is, and I understand what they have done as far as counting in that. I went around yesterday and physically counted the parking spots. I only have 99. So I don't know where they're coming up with 100+ counting spots, unless they're counting parking spots that are on private property there. So the way I could figure out that there were. I went around yesterday at 11:15 in the morning, and I counted on the southern part of the area. There are there are about 37 parking spaces. There were 20 cars parked in those. That's before noon. The rest of the lot, I counted that there were 55 spots, of which 15 were used. Okay? The eastern part of that lot is quite often a lot of residents that live on Buffalo are parked there overnight. You'll see that in the morning when you come in. Buffalo has quite a bit of heavy traffic on it too, as far as parking. And I think that's mostly residents. Also, on Friday night or Saturday night or Sunday during the day, you can come to that east lot and you'll find it basically full. There was a picture in there of a parking lot at a certain time. And so absolutely hardly any parking. I think there were 3 cars on the east side. That is a rare thing. It certainly was not taken when the businesses were in operation, because I have at least 3 cars that are usually parked there every day. There was nothing done on our end, okay? My concern is because we're right next door, and we probably face at least a third plus of that lot down on the east end where the apartments are going to be. I love the project, okay? Don't get me wrong. I think it's a great project. I like the way it looks and all that. But my concern is if they think they're going to use 40 spots, I think they're thinking they need 60 spots simply because they got 26 and they're asking for 40 more. That's going to close me off, because where are they going to park? Are they going to park on the south end of the lot? No, it's going to be on the north end by our door where we receive and all that. So
All right.
I think it would be very impactful on our business.
All right, thanks
Okay.
for your comments.
Okay.
Appreciate you.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brett Allward. I am the owner and operator of the Reservoir Lounge right next to Stone's Throw. I've been there for 17 years. I have some questions and some concerns. Again, not opposed to development, like the idea of more housing going in anywhere in Grand Rapids for that matter. And that's a fantastic idea. We've been waiting for something to happen in this area in Creston many times. I've been through these processes a couple of occasions where big things were going to happen and then they collapsed and went away. So I've been weathering this storm, so to speak, for about 17 years now. First concerns are parking is obviously a concern. And we talk about peak hours. I don't know what the city or the parking authority considers peak hours. My peak hours are obviously different than Stone's Throw's peak hours. We do 90% of my business happens after 6 p.m. at night. That was greatly impacted by the pandemic, which shut me down for a little over a year. So we're not open for lunches at this time, mostly because of staffing, and we're still recovering from the losses taken during the last 2.5 years. And we hope to change that and, continue to get back to open daytime hours, which would significantly change parking during the day as well if we were open for lunch as we were previously. But, as Gordon goes around and looks and counts parking lots, I was there last Tuesday. There wasn't a parking spot to be found anywhere in the evening. We do events Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights. We are usually busy Fridays and Saturday nights. I mean, really the only night that we ourselves are not very busy is typically Monday because, hey, it's Monday. And everybody's got to get back to work and do the things they skipped out on Friday. Sundays, pretty decent brunch. We do an event every other Sunday night, so we're busy those nights. Really, the only night that I'm not typically fairly busy is Thursday evenings, and that's just our fluke night of the week. We're not packed on Thursdays. The other thing that's a little frustrating for me, just from the perspective of the idea of leasing these spaces, these 40 spaces, which we certainly do need, aside from the fact that myself and some other businesses have been there for a long time, the Creston Business Association pays the city for these spaces to keep them meter free. I believe that number is somewhere around $12,000 a year. It doubled a year ago. So even in the middle of my business being closed, I've continued to pay that fee. I pay $2,600 a year. So that's roughly 20%. And you're talking about taking away 40 spaces that I am dependent upon. The other thing that I find interesting is that, again, appreciate the development idea. Love it. More people in the neighborhood, good for everybody. But myself, I'm a bike rider. I own 3 bicycles. I ride quite a bit. But I also own 2 cars. Now at my age, I can do that. I'm in my 50s. So I'm not a 20-something that's going to live in a micro apartment. But this is still, for lack of a better word, this is Michigan. This is America. Most people have a vehicle. I have 18 employees. Every one of them, except one, has a vehicle. And the one that doesn't, he has an electric bike because it's more effective for him to get around that way than it is with a car, and he can bring it into the building. There are 5 apartments in my building. I don't own the building, but there are 5 apartments. So there's at least 5 tenants. I believe there's actually 9. There is a karate studio above that hosts, they're open. I don't know exactly what their hours are. I'm not taking karate, but I know 4 or 5 days a week they have multiple classes. So there's always cars there for that, and their employees as well. There's Stone's Throw, even though they got a new development over on Leonard Street, they're still keeping that building and utilizing that. So there's realtors, buyers, sellers, their support staff, Stone's Throw, Sun Title, I think I misspoke, sorry, Sun Title. The church uses the parking lot. These are things that these businesses that have been here for many, many years, and I am grateful, unequivocally grateful that it is meter free, because that helps me and my business, especially being on the wrong side of the tracks for so many years, as to like compared to downtown development, west side development, and so on and so forth. So I've been happy to pay that money to keep that meter free.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Appreciate your comments. Anyone else on this development?
Hello, my name is Michael Biddick. I represent Saugatuck Brewing Company / Creston Brewery. Again, huge support of the project. The only problem we have, again, is parking. Same thing that Brett has kind of said. Our employees rely on that. We have an event space, so that's kind of one of our selling tools that we use, is that, hey, we do have a lot there that we also contribute to as well. And then so when we look at that, it's a huge selling point for our business, which is a huge selling point that we're going to have people living. There's 72 people possibly plus that are going to be living across the street. That's great for Brett and I, and even Stone's Throw. They're going to need furniture. But where are the people going to come from outside of the neighborhood? Are we going to shut ourselves down, and do we become an area that's hard to park and hard to come visit and come have a beer, come have dinner, go to a show if we do something, or have their event? So that's just kind of a concern for us as a business. And then one of the questions I do have, we wish everyone rode a bike and we were being green in this world, but having no data to support the bike versus car, that kind of troubles me. There's no data, there's no report, there's no study that's been done. Just like Brett said, there's going to be a lot of people that have cars. We have to be realistic, and even if I went back 15 years and lived in a micro apartment, do I want to get on a bus and go to Meijer and get my groceries and bus them back. Probably not. I'm going to have some sort of car, whether it's a beater or a good car. I have no idea. But I don't know what they're going to go for as far as people that live there. You know, if it's college that they're going after, or just, you know, single families kind of thing, or single people. Again, big support of the project. Just the parking is super vital to our business as a restaurant and brew pub. So that's all I really have. Thank you.
Quick question for you. Do you pay for the upkeep of the lot?
Yeah, the neighborhood all pays a chunk.
Okay.
Brett pays considerably more than we do. We contribute X amount of dollars per year to
Okay.
that as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else on this case?
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Is that how is that calculation made? Is it on the number of spaces that are available?
That I don't. That
We can have
Thank
Josh
you.
answer that after the public hearing. All right, thanks.
Hello again. My name is Brooke Osterman. I'm with Housing Next, which is an organization that is meant to move housing solutions forward. But I'm also here today representing as a resident of the Creston neighborhood and really speaking to kind of the overall demand for housing that we know exists in Kent County, and then the residential firsthand perspective of how much that is needed in my own neighborhood. I'm really, really excited about the opportunity. We know that 67% of all Michigan families or households are just comprised of one or two people. And so the micro unit, the Studio Com, is serving a critical need in the community. For the parking piece too, I would just say something that we know impacts overall affordability of residential units, specific to kind of the nuances of that Creston neighborhood, is overall affordability with the cost of additional parking and infrastructure for that. So just excited to see the mixed use development, the innovative way of moving those things together to make sure that we can provide not only for the demand of housing needed in the neighborhood, but also at a cost that is attainable and affordable for many of us residents. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Son? Okay, there it is. My name is Deck Andrzak. I'm a property owner in Creston. I received my mailings. I've sent some communication into the Planning Commission, so you have a written statement from me. I know that today is just really regarding the parking waivers from what I heard, right? It's not anything else. So I think, the statements that you received cover a few other things. I haven't really met the developer before, and I've also made my communications with the SID board for the North Quarter, as well as the Creston Business Association. As you heard from Brett and a few of the other property owners and business owners, there's a huge amount of support for residential in this area, so we're excited about having it, but the parking is the concern. We've been here for many years. I've been in this area for years, just like the others, and we've had to fend for the parking, whether or not you're contributing to those public lots or not. The residents in this area, I have 18 units in this area, I think it is, for residential, and everybody has to use street parking or public parking. And for the Grand Rapids Parking Commission to consider leasing spots specific to a property, I think is not very equitable to the people that would probably be willing to do that today. So I think I'd like to see the full parking waiver granted, even more than what's needed, and just let them fend for parking instead of leasing them specific spots. That's my position on this.
Anyone else on this case? All right, and I'll close the public hearing. Okay. Yeah, I'll reopen it.
Sorry, I didn't realize we were about to close. So anyway, my name is Bradley Hartwell. I live in the Creston neighborhood. I've developed more than 1 million square feet in the city in the past 17 years. I was on the deal team at Rockford Construction that redeveloped the west side on Bridge Street. I was a professor at Central Michigan University, where I taught commercial real estate finance for 3 years. Today, I'm not here in any of those capacities, obviously. I'm just here as a concerned neighbor. I just wanted you all to know that. I have a lot of experience on the subject matter and also wanted to flex in a public forum a little bit. Mostly kidding about that part. Anyway, more importantly, though, I've lived in Creston my entire life. I own a few properties there. I live on Plainfield, 2 blocks from this project. I can actually see it from my bedroom window. I'm very passionate about, that said, I don't know the deal team, and I stand nothing to gain from the project except hopefully some new neighbors soon. I'm very passionate about our community. I understand there's some opposition here, and so I just wanted to get my professorial groove on and provide a historical perspective from someone who's literally on the front lines. In 1906, a new name was submitted, Creston, for the neighborhood, which was a combination of crest and town. A 1906 Evening Press article explains that residents hoped to be on the crest of a wave to permanent prosperity, which was illusory at the time because the neighborhood was fraught with crime, which has warranted the rebranding of the neighborhood in the first place. It was nicknamed the Bloody Fifth because of the crime that was going on, and also is the name of my favorite beer at Creston Brewing today. This is also when the Neighborhood Association was formed and facilitated street lighting, road improvements, and adding parks like Riverside Park and other good stuff. Since then, we've seen businesses and neighbors come and go, more vacancy in our commercial district, increased crime, and closing of Creston High School. Thankfully, City High was repurposed the high school, and some businesses have come back in hopes of more reinvestment of housing, etc. I bring all this up because I believe to have a prosperous community, we need diversity of our neighbors, we need diversity of income, and we need diversity of housing choices. Today, there isn't a single market rate housing unit built in Creston in recent history. If I were a young professional who wanted to live in a property like this, in the Creston neighborhood, technically I would be discriminated against because we don't have that kind of housing that exists today. I know it's not really a popular opinion, but it's technically true and at least a little bit funny, I feel like. There have been 3 LIHTC developers who unsuccessfully attempted to build low-income housing in Creston because it didn't meet the scores for MSHDA credits for a multitude of reasons that include walkable services and amenities. We need people and critical mass to justify these walkable amenities that can make way for that, but today, sadly, it's not feasible to finance or build it. The reality is that at any point in time, the city could rescind the free parking here, install arms, and the result would be the same, except we don't get the economic benefit of additional housing stock. We can and will adapt to the parking supply. I'm confident of that. Creston will be redeveloped eventually. I've said when, not if, for 7 years, and it's finally happening. After reviewing all the details of this project, I believe this group has a forward-focused outlook and will do a great job here. I'd love to see all of us ride the crest of that wave to permanent prosperity today together. We need people to prosper. We need housing for those people. And we need each other in this project like this to achieve that. Creston needs that. So please, approve this to facilitate the project. And then can I just say one last thing? So tonight there's a holiday party in Creston. It's called Lights on Creston at 4 p.m.
Nice
So
plug.
come check it out. You can actually see the site and get a vibe for the neighborhood and stuff like that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Brad. Anyone else? All right, I'm closing the public hearing for good now. Applicant, if there's things you want to address that were raised, I don't know if anything pops to mind, otherwise we can jump in.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say thanks to everybody who came out to share your thoughts on the project. I think that from a need of housing standpoint, which isn't really what we're here to talk about, I think everybody's on the same page. Parking is a resource in the neighborhood that's obviously already shared amongst everybody, and I hope we can come to some kind of arrangement here. I don't think I have any claim over a parking lot or anything like that. I totally respect what's going on. Just hopefully we can find a way forward to make the project happen. So thanks, everybody.
Kristen or maybe Josh, could you speak to the process of how this lease arrangement works? I don't think, it's not really up to us if it's done or not. I guess it's adjacent to our consideration because it can't really be counted as credit towards the required parking, but it's still somehow part of the consideration. So maybe you can provide some explanation on that for us.
Yeah, let me answer that first if it's okay. Of course, I hit the timer instead of my microphone that time. So it is part of your consideration that the availability of district parking counts towards the waiver. What it can't do is, because of the nature of the lease arrangements and that they're not permanent, meeting the requirements of the ordinance, we can't count those parking spaces towards the available supply. So it's a consideration of your waiver with all of the understandings of how that parking works, but it's not part of the available parking or supply of parking towards the development. Does that help?
My question was, in looking at this, is the overall impact of the businesses adjacent, and since they're already paying for these spaces, I would assume their payment would go down, but I just wonder how that's managed.
So I just want to clarify, there is no actual long-term agreement that we have with the Creston Business Association. They pay us annually, and that is for offsetting maintenance costs when the city purchased and improved both the West Creston and the East Creston lot. I'm trying to get the copy of the latest invoice to know what it was, and it did go up, but that's because our costs have gone up significantly over my tenure at the city, because we're doing a lot more in terms of the maintenance and how it works. None of our agreements with any customer anywhere in the city is a long-term. They're all month-to-month. And there's a whole variety of those, and I'll look directly at the city attorney's office. There's a reason why we don't do anything longer than that. We only do month-to-month, and that's for a whole variety of legal reasons. What our current process is, and this is available for any business to do at any time, is they can just submit a request to us, and we actually do a notice to every adjacent business. So when we've done it in any of our neighborhood lots, when a business requests it, we send it to every business within, I think it's 400 feet of that parking lot, and tell them, someone has requested, we're going to turn a portion of these into permit parking.
Okay.
It's available for anyone. Just submit a request if this is, if we approve this, and anybody can lease that for whatever reason. And the current rate is $35 per space per month. So what we find is a lot of businesses don't want to pay that, but the ones who do and actually are precipitating the request, they end up doing that. So in the case of this, that's what we've shared with the developers. That's what the cost is as it currently is to date. That's subject to change at any time because we view our rates on a fairly regular basis. So that's the cost as it associated with that. But we still are the manager and the reviewer of the lot, and we reserve the right at the discretion for being the good steward and manager of the parking lot as it sits currently. And the only prohibition is we have been trying to modify no parking in from 4 to 6 for snow maintenance operations. But right now, we all know, as some have shared, that lots of residents use the lot, which takes up the parking from businesses on nights and weekends, but that's because there are no meters in there, and we are not regulating it in that way. And we have not done that as such.
What is the decision-making process on whether you approve a lease or not? Or is there, if there's no objection, you just do it?
Right now, tomorrow, if Stone's Throw said we'd like to put permits in the parking lot, we would put them out for anybody and all the adjacent property owners or the Reservoir Bar, or any of the businesses who have talked about that. They could lease those spaces directly from us. And it could be up to the full allotment under current, which is 30% of a parking lot can be done without any additional approval. We could go up much higher than that at the discretion of our advisory committee, the Mobile GR Commission. That is in their purview. It is not city commission because it's operations of the actual parking lot.
You said 30%?
30% of any of our business district lots, which we own a lot of them all across the city, can be converted for permit parking use. And that is for exclusive use for an individual or business that pays for it for someone to be able to use.
And so did I understand this, how many spots are in this lot?
So my count is 104, but this gentleman is now making me want to go back and verify that count. And I will say we just had this happen recently where sometimes there's restriping that takes place, and I'm going to default to him on that. So maybe it's 99.
So 40 is over the 30%, so this would have to go through your commission?
Well, if it's 104 spaces as we currently did, I'm sorry, did I say 30? I meant 40%. Sorry, it's 40%, to be very clear about that. So it's 42 spaces as currently calculated, and that was in the enabling legislation that was approved by the Mobile GR Commission. It's 42 spaces is the maximum, but they can grant, if all the businesses that apply and it's 47 spaces, we would go and say, we're going to increase this to 5 because we've had the additional use based on that, or the request based on that.
And your commission, what consideration do they take of, transient traffic? Someone that's not going to have a permit in their window?
So if we did entertain increasing the amount beyond the 40%, we'd do a full comprehensive analysis of both the West Creston and the East Creston before we did that. So I could answer that question for any of them. What's the transient count? What did we experience that? And then we do a more detailed on-street parking analysis, because as many people in the know, I mean, this is a very well-parked district, right? It's got regulated on-street metered parking all along Plainfield. It's got lots of little configurations. There's lots of surface parking lots that are in the area. There's lots of on-street parking that exists. That's one of the benefits and why it is one of my favorite business districts, is it's very accessible. It has bike lanes on Plainfield. There's bike lanes on Quimby Street. And it's served really well by the Rapid on Plainfield as well. So there's a lot of really great things that are happening in there, and I think you've heard that from a lot of those. But strictly from the Mobile GR perspective, from a parking management issue, there's capacity for being able to absorb additional residential development and still support all the commercial development. There's tools in our toolbox that we've not had to use because it's not hit the threshold, but if any of the surrounding streets qualify for residential parking permits, anyone who's living in this new development would also qualify for those.
Do you know, is it the business association that determines the amount that these businesses are paying into the maintenance fund?
We do, and I'm trying to actually get the calculation that we charged them in 2022 and what that calculation is based off of. But I was just assured that there is no long-term agreement that specifies to every specific level about how and dictating how the city manages the lot. It is specifically targeted to help defray operations and maintenance costs because they are not metered. They are not bringing in revenue to help pay for that. They are just a cost to the city right now.
But you said that there's no long-term agreement, but we've just had several people talk about paying an annual, which seems to me to be longer than month to month.
Yeah, but that's a really great point, and not, for the purposes of today, I don't want to go into the sins of our past, but we have lots of longer-term agreements that we've had for condo agreements and other things that have been negotiated well before this. For the purposes of an individual that is leasing parking from the city, we do not have long-term agreements with businesses for the actual use of public parking.
Well, I don't actually care about all of the other things. I just care about this one thing right now.
There is no agreement, and they pay a cost to help defray the maintenance costs for the facility.
It's not
That's
a
it.
use. It's not a use agreement.
It's not a use agreement.
It's
And
maintenance.
it's not actually an agreement. It's they are invoiced a cost to help pay for the maintenance costs. They could choose tomorrow to not pay it. There's nothing that's in there that says they have to.
And Josh, there is no reservations there. They're paying the cost, but then the lot's still just open.
That's correct.
Right. So they're not getting anything in return directly. Well, yeah. Free lot for everybody.
Right, you're subsidizing the parking of your patrons, basically, yes, absolutely. So I guess my follow-up question to that then is, if we're doing that, and then we're going to also consider leasing or whatever to this apartment complex, I just feel like I mean, this is probably not a popular city opinion, but that's not really what I'm here for. But then I'm wondering why we're just taking, we would consider just continuously taking money for a finite amount of spots, regardless of the use. It just seems like, I don't know, that just seems a little sketchy to me. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Well, so I don't fully understand your question, so can you restate it for me?
So if we're thinking about permitting 44 spaces, if that's like one of the considerations here, is like, where do we make up the parking spots? But we're also already collecting from local patrons in order to subsidize the lots for local people to visit and take place in the furniture business and the bar that I frequent also. But I'm wondering, like, why are we also considering then permitting spaces if we're already covering the costs of maintenance for that space?
It's not covering the full cost. What they pay is not the full cost recovery for the lots.
So then why do you collect it at all then?
Because it's a past practice that we've had in terms of, there are some spaces that they have for their exclusive use in the West Creston lot, Central Interconnect when they use that for years, as well as a handful in this.
So are you saying without can I just finish what I'm going to say here? I know it's probably confusing, but I'm also confused, and I feel like the whole rest of the people here are confused too. So we're just trying to outline some things here. So I'm wondering then what it is. I mean, are we just right now collecting for maintenance so that we don't have meters? Is that the first thing? So that's not metered parking.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is we are considering looking at permitting for this new building. But I guess, like, to me, that's the same thing. Except we're just collecting twice. And if there's not actual permits for that lot, then what's the enforcement look like?
No, okay. When there is a petition that's received to convert what is now a free, unregulated, unrestricted, non-payment form surface parking lot, which is the East Creston lot, when there's a permit or there's a request to do this, we convert a portion of it into permit parking. The individuals who choose to lease or businesses who choose to lease pay the requisite rate per month, and it's on a month-to-month lease in terms of how they choose to do that. The rest of the parking lot is available for any other type of use, for any type of transient or visitor parking. As it relates to this specific lot, if we converted it over, we would definitely reassess what we are assessing the Creston Business District in terms of what they're paying for the parking, because there would be additional costs. We do budgeting just like everybody else on an annual basis for our fiscal year, and we do that for costs for landscaping, snow maintenance, street sweeping services, painting, also defrayed asset management costs for when the lots need to be resurfaced, and for our asset management inventory, which we're currently doing for both of those lots as well as many of the surface lots. So we try to capitalize all of that. The money that they're paying us is only a very small portion of what those two lots are currently costing the city from a carrying cost perspective. So if there's additional revenue that's received as it relates to a new type of use that's being allowed on either the East Creston lot for this one or on the West Creston lot, what was charged to the business district would go down commensurate with what the revenue that's coming in associated with that.
So we just learned that most of those costs have doubled in the last calendar year. So I guess this is like, you can see like none of this math seems to make any sense.
I guess the easiest thing to say is everybody always looks at the money coming into parking. It's an extremely expensive business to run. We own a lot of land and we have to keep it up. And I will also say in this East Creston lot, we received not one, not two, but 3 code compliance complaints that we had to pay for, which were not generated by the city, which were generated by residents and other people living in the corresponding area. So we're always trying to hold ourselves to a very high standard. We also did install security cameras during some of the concerns that have been shared with the business district back in 2019. The installation of those alone and the maintenance of those are actually pretty expensive because we pulled full fiber optic, real time. It's shared with the police department for use for anything, and that's in the West Creston as well as the East Creston lot. We also regularly are patrolling them to go out and look at them, and then we also have, people that are going out and doing cleaning, picking trash. We have landscaping contracts, et cetera. So there are high carrying costs for these. The only thing we have is a tool in the toolbox that we did about 5 years ago now, because we had a number of business districts that wanted to be able to have more guaranteed parking in an unregulated environment. So we allow, under this policy, up to 40% of those spaces to be converted over. It doesn't have to be all of them all at once. So it's basically as on a first come by first come basis. It's not guaranteed for the developer to have access to all 42 of them right from the first day, and we made that very clear. It's just, this is one of the rare instances where there's a development and there's actually a municipal-owned city parking lot that's adjacent to it that can help defray some of the costs, or for some of the operations.
So I guess my last question would be, in your professional opinion, based on the position that you have with the city, is there enough like first come, first serve, like would the neighborhood be served plenty by the current parking situation without renting or leasing the 44 or however many spaces we're talking about here?
Yes. And there are also additional tools in the toolbox that can be triggered after the development comes online to help mitigate anything that happens as a result of that. There's residential parking permit program, which has been around for a while, which is really only the largest neighborhood it's in is the neighbors of Belknap Lookout. And that was as a result of a lot of development that happened from Grand Valley State University and as well as from Corewell Health. So as that stands, we monitor that twice a year, and that all goes to our advisory group that then takes a look at that, and then those go directly to the city commission if the threshold is triggered for those. So it's a more proactive process instead of a reactive process. So if for some reason 5 years from now I'm wrong, we have a tool in the toolbox to be able to help mitigate that. And that could be that the business district is taking off even more so that there's a need for more business parking that's actually creating an issue with some of the residential units in the area.
I have a question I think I know the answer to, but Are there any other considerations like them building their own parking ramp adjacent to this to secure the kind of parking that they need? And I don't know if that's a question to the developer or to the...
So I think that would be more relevant to the developer than to Mr. Naramore. I think for the purposes of this review under your scope of authority and based on the zoning ordinance, that the availability in close proximity of district parking is the relevant point to offset whether a waiver is appropriate. Pardon me? Sorry, I was just focusing on the district parking. Yes, there's other elements like transit and bike parking that also go into, and on-street parking that also go into the consideration of a parking reduction or a waiver. And what Mr. Naramore is telling us is based on the city's surveys and counts, we believe that there is adequate capacity to support the use of this parking by the residential development. Now, the arrangements between the Mobile GR Commission and the cost associated with the lease arrangements contrasting with the maintenance costs, that really sounds like either an operational concern or an issue for Mobile GR to determine whether that is a fair arrangement to Creston to continue paying for the maintenance cost if a portion are leased. I'm presuming that that's something Mr. Naramore faces with a multitude of city surface parking lots. But for the purposes of your review, there is a district parking lot in the reasonable proximity. Based on our counts, we're telling you that there is adequate capacity. You can choose to agree with that, or you can choose to state that, no, we don't feel that that's appropriate for your reasons, and that you would require the development group to provide parking on site or adjacent through means of either surface parking lots or a structure.
I think that that's where my question is. And, having listened to the businesses in the district, is there, and having parked there myself, because I used to go to Sun Tidal quite a bit for meetings, it seemed that there were a lot of space, not a lot of spaces available. So that's where my question is. I think everybody that I heard from agrees it's a good project, but are we cutting off our nose to spite ourselves, and that then we're taking away parking from what's also making this a viable and comeback, wonderful neighborhood area where, of course, housing would then just, so it's sort of, that's what I'm weighing in my mind. It's not the operational cost, but I was trying to consider, is there enough parking for the businesses that currently operate there?
And that's completely reasonable for you to be asking that question. And, I would offer that this is going to be a continued struggle for the Planning Commission, for the city to balance. We have a critical need for housing. We know this. We have a critical need for affordable housing. And we've provided you with that data in the past, and we've got reports that quantify the amount of housing we need and the price points that we need it at. We know that the inclusion of parking or the construction of parking costs money. That parking is going to be passed on, of course, to the cost of the development and the tenant themselves or the owners of that. We also, I think, as a city, subscribe to the fact that surface parking lots, including the ones that the city owns, are not the highest and best use for the city. For the most part, we look at our surface parking lots as developable development opportunities when the time comes, and certainly there's considerations there. We know that housing and beds and heads are what provides the population density to support business districts like this. Because those heads in the bed are patrons of the business, they spend money in their district, and we know overall that those businesses are healthier when there's people that are in the neighborhoods to provide the businesses, to utilize the businesses. And so I think that this is going to be a balance that we've struggled with in the past, and unfortunately for all of you, this is only going to get harder. There are actually several cities around the country that are starting to look at no parking requirements. We have that downtown, but they're looking at it as a citywide issue. I don't know if we're there yet, and I'm not proposing that here in this moment, but I'm telling you that that is becoming a national trend because parking costs money. We want housing, we need housing, we want business districts. We all love the Creston neighborhood and its pedestrian scale and all that it offers and its potential to continue to offer. And so when we have parking requirements, we have to look at that as, if we didn't have parking requirements, then the market will bear what the market will bear. And we're trying in some ways to force mode shifts by looking at the pretty onerous requirement of bicycle parking, so that if I'm living in this space, it's going to be far easier and cheaper for me to own my bike and have a safe and secured space, and then drive my bike to my place of work, or hop on the transit, which is why we want to look at more dense developments on transit lines. And so individuals like myself, if I choose to live here, I'm looking at this saying, gosh, owning a car is quite expensive, paying for my parking space is quite expensive, my insurance is expensive, perhaps I don't really need it, and it becomes a cost that can be eliminated from my household budget. So those are all the factors that you need to balance, and I think fortunately in the city of Grand Rapids, we were anticipating some of this several years ago, which is why we put the burden on you as part of your consideration for land uses and giving you tools to be able to think a little bit more holistically of a neighborhood to determine whether we really want each individual project to carry the cost and the space dedicated to private parking.
I agree with everything that you've said. I absolutely. When I lived in Seattle, I got rid of my car because I had good enough mass transit, good enough access to other modes of operation that I didn't need a car. And I don't know that we're, as some have said, we're ready to make that move. I would like to. And many of the projects that we do have for housing, no matter where they're located in dense neighborhoods, do provide some parking. So that's my dilemma in my head, is how much does the city provide that, and then, or waive that requirement? And I'm waiving, I agree I'm waiving the requirement. I live in downtown where it's waived. And, but I don't want to take away from the needs of others. So I'm just questioning whether or not there is excess space, I guess is what I'm thinking about. And I'm open to hearing from anybody else, but that's where my mind is right now.
Correct me if I'm wrong. In response to Commissioner Wallace's question to Mr. Naramore, you said that you think that there is sufficient parking to handle this addition without them leasing the space or permitting the space. Is that what you stated? Okay. Yes, he nodded. But I guess the problem I'm having is that they have the ability to request, and if no one else gobbles up that 40%, then they could get that, and that's my problem. So I don't know what our role is in preventing that, because I don't want that to be designated for a specific place. I don't think that makes sense considering the nature of this business district. I think you need to, that prevents it from being peak, off-peak, office hours versus restaurant hours versus residential hours from actually being used. You're going to see more empty spaces here throughout the day. I think that's a detriment to this business district. And so I don't know how we prevent that.
That's a mobile GR policy choice at that point, that the mobile GR commission determines
But if it's below the threshold, can you still make that policy decision to not approve a lease?
I think they
Yes.
can choose.
It's a maximum that's allowed under our current policies, up to 40%. And we can go back to them and ask for more if we think that that is an operational consideration. A lot of what you're talking about are very detailed operational considerations that we make. I mean, we do that in garages, right? In real time, we're actually looking at capacity and operations for the amount of oversell or undersell percentage and, maintaining transient parking counts. In a service parking lot, it's a little different because they're not gated. We could choose to do that in the future should it reach the level that we need to manage or regulate at that. At this time, we have not made that investment in Creston because there's underutilized on-street parking. A lot of the metered parking during the day is not fully utilized, whereas the lot can be from time to time. We've not done a detailed analytical study of the counts in both the west and east lot, as I said, since 2017. We haven't done it since then.
Is your question whether they can say no?
Yeah.
So, yeah, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Do you care what we think or not?
No, I don't, why does it, no.
I'm just curious,
No,
like,
takes us off the hook.
do we have any say in that?
I was asked to come and represent from a staff perspective.
I understand, and I know.
Parking and the parking waiver consideration for a development, taking in all the things that we're looking at. I care from the sense of I'm here to provide you with context that there is capacity for doing parking. It can either be on the adjacent streets or it can be through the permit parking process that we have under our current policies that are allowed.
I think if the Planning Commission would like to send an ask to Mobile GR Commission, you could do that as a body, and the Mobile GR Commission would take that under advisement.
I think it would be a mistake to permit a portion of this parking lot because I think it would be a detriment to the district. I agree with the property owner who said that he supports this development, this use, and the waiver of the parking, but not the permitting of spaces. I think that would be a mistake. So I don't know how to balance that. I don't really know what our role in that is, but if we can send a strongly worded letter and that has some weight, then great. I don't know.
I was going to say the same thing. I think this is a really good project. I'm in support of this waiver. Obviously, parking is an issue everywhere. I mean, I know the representative said that there is adequate parking. I've lived in Grand Rapids since 2017, and I've never been in a neighborhood with adequate parking. So, if you can point that out to me, I'll park my car there and then catch the bus home. But in this instance, though, I think it's important to just think in totality. I graduated in 2017 as well. So I'm thinking, if I'm working full time in an economy with the highest inflation in 40 years, groceries are sky high. Would I be choosing to live in a 350 square foot apartment and I have a car? Highly unlikely. It's highly unlikely somebody's out there driving their BMW and looking for a 350 square foot apartment. I don't think that's reasonable. So what I'm saying is that the person who is most likely occupying these spaces do not have a car. They're probably utilizing public transportation and or utilizing their bike in order to get back and forth to where they need to go. Yeah, and that's just my opinion on that. I think for what you just said earlier, I 100% agree. I think leasing out spaces for this development is totally unfair. I think the businesses, the people in the neighborhood, they have to fend for parking. If you want to live in this neighborhood, whether it's a new development or an existing one, you will also have to fend for parking, since that's what people are doing in this neighborhood. I think that's totally unfair, and I don't agree with that. But for this motion, I'm completely in support of it.
So I agree that we need to look at this entire situation, right? So there are share roads and bike lanes in this neighborhood. I used to live in this neighborhood and bike to work far more often than I've never biked to work from where I currently live. There is great transit service, 15 minutes during the peak hours and 30 minutes otherwise. Not only is there this district lot that's adjacent to the property, there's one across the street. I trust Mobile GR's process for evaluating the spaces. Don't have a strong opinion about that as other commissioners do, but the businesses have complementary peak times as was described by the business owners in terms of the bar not being the same peak as Stone's Throw, and I think there is enough flexibility in this neighborhood to grant this parking waiver, and not to mention all the bike parking that they are providing, both in their covered spaces, but also providing the hooks in the units. I think it meets the intent of what we're going for, and similar to one of the projects we heard last time related to like the TOD districts, like this is the type of location that we want to test these things out at, where we want to encourage mode shift. So I'm in complete support, and I'm happy to hear from anybody else, but also very happy to make a motion.
I'm in support. I think after listening to everybody, because I'm weighing, we have to let Mobile GR do their job. We're not in the parking business, as much as I'm concerned about that. And I agree that we need to test out projects that, one of my first questions was, did they have any data? And I agree with Commissioner Williams that people that live in micro places probably, are in an income level where they also want to save on transportation. Maybe I'm making a big assumption about that, but you were more eloquent about it, I thought, in telling your story than I am. So I am going to support the motion.
My experience in other cities and parking compared to our city, maybe the extremes being everyone pays for their own and controls their own 100%. Maybe there's that on one extreme, and then maybe the Seattle version of it's all free for all. In between that is, I think, a good place where our city is, which is trying to use the tools available to diversify the use and spread the costs around in the actively managed way. That's my belief of what our city is doing. And I say that especially in contrast to my company, who has offices in 7 different cities, and no other city does it, I don't think, as well as ours, which is to try to take advantage of spaces and put them to good use in a data-driven way, as opposed to what would be a lot easier for the city, which would be to put up meters in that lot and have everybody pay a very high hourly rate, probably, and then no one would be happy either. So that's just my 2 cents, I guess, on the whole topic of city approach to parking. In this case, I'm in support of this project for the reasons stated.
Are we ready for a motion? Great. Okay. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the request of Pinnacle Construction Group, James C. Lewis, for a waiver of over 50% of the required parking for a new mixed-use development at 220 Quimby Street Northeast for the following reasons. The use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the project will support the purpose of the TNTBA district to direct higher density housing to a location on or within walking distance of a major transit route, and support the recommendation of the master plan to help to eliminate redundant parking by encouraging the use of shared parking for uses that experience differing peak parking demands. The use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.8.e because the site will be developed so as not to impede the normal and orderly development or improvement of surrounding property for permitted uses. Safe, convenient, and well-defined vehicular, bicycle, and pedestrian circulation within and to and from the site is provided. The development will be designed to meet all other requirements of the zoning ordinance. The use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood and adjacent properties because the project will support the desired mixed-use character of the neighborhood, and this parking waiver is necessary to allow the use to the scale proposed. The use will not have adverse effects on the neighborhood because the amount of parking requested for a waiver will be offset by nearby parking lots, on-street parking, the use of public transportation, and bicycle parking. The use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic noise or visual clutter, because the intensity of the use is appropriate to its surroundings with access to multiple streets and public transit. The use would not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, and otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the proximity of the project to public transit will encourage mobility shifts that can reduce dependence on single-occupancy vehicles and decrease traffic congestion. Public or private infrastructure and services already exist and are adequate to support the proposed development. The use would not be detrimental to the financial stability and economic welfare of the city because publicly available parking in the area already exists to support the increased need resulting from the proposed use, and there are businesses in the vicinity within walking distance the new residents are anticipated to patronize, and the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all applicable state laws. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions at A, approvals as shown on the screen.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and support. Any final discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Our next case is 2135 East Beltline Ave Northeast. I'm very sorry, Sarah.
We're going to take a break.
We're going to take a break. 5 minutes. Is that okay? Thank you.
Yes, Chairman. Thank you.
Let's do this. Let's do this. I told Carol a specific time, and I'm trying to stick to it. All right, here we go. Take it away, Sarah.
All right, let's talk about signage now. So our next case for 2135 East Beltline Avenue, the applicant is requesting an amendment to the Celebration Village Plan Sign Program, and that is to allow signage for one of two new buildings that are being developed. So if you remember back in May, the City Commission approved the PRD amendment to allow for these two buildings based on your recommendation. Prior to that, we've seen over a dozen amendments to the PRD here. With that being said, the original PRD and Plan Sign Program were established in the late 90s. This is an aerial photo showing the subject site. It's important to note that this building on the subject site has been demolished to facilitate those two new buildings that are going in. And another important aspect to note is that the original PRD had the buildings closer to the street. However, an amendment allowed for parking to be in front of these buildings. So because of that, visibility may have been impacted, signage visibility may have been impacted given that the buildings are now 50 feet further back. Obviously, the property here has frontage along the East Beltline with an access way into the Celebration development here, which would be right here. And there's also an access further north and two additional access ways on the south side of the Celebration development. This photo that you're looking at here is the original Plan Sign Program that was approved, and the subject site can be located right here. And as you notice, at the time, there was just one outlot that was configured in this space. As I've mentioned, there's now going to be two buildings, and so that is what brings the need for the amendment today. This is a site plan showing those two new buildings. We won't be discussing proposed signage for this building. The applicant is here to discuss the urgent care building here. And as you can see, they're proposing 4 wall signs as well as a ground sign. I'll just very quickly show you what those signs look like. Obviously, they're advertising what the business is, which is an urgent care, and they would like a wall sign on each elevation. Planning staff would like you to consider eliminating the south elevation wall sign, because when we look at the overall site plan here, you'll notice this sign is within a walkway, a pedestrian walkway, and not necessarily an integral part of the internal roadways or the East Beltline. In a way, when you're traveling north down the East Beltline, it would be very difficult to actually see this sign. So I'd like you to take that into consideration today when you're assessing the appropriateness of the signage that's proposed. In terms of the ground sign here, I would like to show you an example. This is what they're proposing. So a masonry base, an appropriately sized ground sign showing 3 tenant panels. One would obviously be for the urgent care. The other 2 would be for the second building that was approved. And when we look at the other side of Celebration Village, there is a ground sign that's very similar to this, and that it shows an option to have tenants within those panels. And that is to say that the intention behind having ground signs at this development was to help direct people to what sort of businesses are within this development, right? It's not necessarily to serve just one business or 3 businesses. It was sort of meant to serve as like a wayfinding element. So when we look at the neighboring property to the north of the subject site, we have a circumstance where a building has their own signage, their own ground sign,
It's fairly different from the other sign on the south side of the development, and it's very different from what is proposed today. And so one thing you'll have to consider is, you know, what it would look like or how it would contrast to this Hopcat sign relative to this other signage that maybe would be more appropriate to help direct people to the businesses. Looking at the comparison to the planned sign program, I also wanted to show you a comparison to the East Beltline Overlay District as well as what they're proposing today. You'll notice with the planned sign program, the main point is to allow for signage on the front of the building and signage on the rear of the building. For the East Beltline overlay, really the intent of that is to just have signage on above the customer entrance on the front of the building. The applicant today obviously is proposing 4 signs for a total that's much greater than what would typically be proposed in this area. In terms of the ground sign, you can see that is pretty similar to the planned sign program and quite smaller than what we would typically see on the East Beltline. However, I want to stress the comparison of why this would be important rather than having a standalone sign for each tenant. This sort of consolidates those, the visibility for those businesses. So in sum, I'm asking you to consider whether the number of the proposed signs is appropriate and if the ground sign is compatible with the surrounding Celebration Village.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, any questions at this time?
I just have one. So in addition to that ground sign at the Hopcat site, do we have a sense of how big their road frontage sign is compared to what's being proposed?
You're saying the size of the Hopcat ground sign?
No, the Hopcat sign that faces the Beltline at the front compared to the urgent care, the proposed urgent care front sign.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty similar. And in this space, it used to be a Chili's, and that actually had the greatest amount of signage, which was approved, compared to the Hopcat building and then this urgent care building. So it is in line with what was typically approved.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thanks, Sarah. I'll invite the applicant up if there are details you want to share with us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Greg McDade. I'm representing the owner and developer on this project. First of all, I would like to thank Elizabeth, Sarah, for helping us maintain our position on this agenda. And I would also like to thank you guys for taking the time to review this item. At the moment, I don't have much more to add. I think Sarah hit on everything that was important here. So if there are any questions or comments, I'm here to field those from you guys.
All right, thanks. Commissioners, questions for the applicant?
Yeah, are you comfortable with the suggestion to eliminate the sign on the south elevation because it doesn't? Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. Typically, when we work with our tenants on these, that's kind of how they lay out their signage. And then they go through the permitting process themselves with the municipality that we're working in. So I don't think it's a big issue on our end, and I can definitely relay that message to the other parties that would need to know.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you. I'll open up the public hearing. If anyone is here today on this case, you can come forward, state your name, and share your thoughts with us. Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, staff, any concerns or discussion?
I just want to make sure that I understand staff's position on the ground sign, that as it's proposed with the 3 tenants next to each other, that you would consider that appropriate based on what is in the other part of Celebration? Or are you saying that the sign itself is not appropriate and also should be eliminated?
I think I think that's at your discretion, but my analysis would be that the intention behind the plan sign program at Celebration, specifically regarding the ground signs, was to allow for multiple tenants to be featured on those ground signs. Which tenants those would be, that wasn't clear from the sign program. But if you'll notice from the original plan, there's one located here. There's a clock tower here that has several panels, and then there's 2 other on this side. So there was no indication that there would need to be a ground sign where this one is proposed.
Yes, I hear you. Okay, thanks.
On that point, and I'm not especially opposed to a ground sign there, but looking at the East Beltline Overlay District, which would allow a ground sign to be much larger, I'm sure is based on the fact that travel speeds are much higher.
That's correct.
On the belt line. So I wonder what small panels would actually do.
I think when I looked at the plan sign program, those monument signs were meant to provide direction for drivers once they're within the development, and less so to grab the drivers off the belt line. I think the intention was the buildings were going to be closer to the street, so there wasn't really a need to have that additional ground sign. Frankly, when you're on the East Beltline, you can see those businesses that are along there. And so the need for the ground sign would really be up to the commission to decide if that's appropriate.
Although I think the overall philosophy of plan sign programs and this project specifically was to really try to consolidate signage so that not each individual development pad had their own sign. And in exchange for that, there was flexibility in terms of the amount of signs and really try to tailor the sign to the needs of the specific development. And so I think you probably do need to be cognizant of the fact that if you approve a ground sign for this specific tenant, there's probably a high likelihood of future tenants or existing buildings requiring or requesting the same consideration. And so I'm not really sure how you're going to balance that without thinking it through on your first ask.
Yeah.
That's just something I'd consider.
Yeah, and thank you, Kristen. And going off of that, when we look at the entirety of Celebration Village, the only ground signs are right here, and the one that I showed you with the Aldi and the other panels. So none of these other tenants within the development have a ground sign.
I think they're helpful, though. This complex has become so large and multifaceted in terms of types of businesses, from banks to wellness centers to theaters. I think it's helpful, and by consolidating, give some management over it. So I do support this request.
And another thing I'd like to add about the visibility is, although travel speeds, range, I think the speed limit on the East Beltline is 55 miles an hour here. There's not a lot of landscaping that's infringing on the visibility of those buildings. You have a couple trees that are about 30 to 40 feet, of separation. They're, even with vehicles parked along the East Beltline, you can still see the buildings and the signage that's on the buildings along the Beltline.
All right, any other questions for staff? Okay. And any concluding thoughts?
I mean, I think the south elevation sign should be eliminated, no question. I would be fine with eliminating the ground sign as well, but I guess I'm not gonna die on that hill. But that would be, it's not close to the driveway. Like, people are gonna be driving much faster by that sign. The visibility, I mean, this signs on the building itself, I think, are pretty significant and easy to see, and I don't see the need for the ground sign either.
And potentially the nature of the use is such that I'm not driving by and spontaneously popping into an urgent care. That's probably something I'm pre-planning when I'm deciding where I need to go for medical care.
For sure. I'm happy to make a motion. Okay. Yeah, any other things for the record?
Does anyone want to push back on her? Just curious.
Does anyone love the ground sign?
I'd prefer a ground sign over a pole sign, but
Well, thankfully, a pole sign isn't proposed. All right. Okay, I will go ahead then. Do we need to say that we have prepared in both ways since I read fast? Okay. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the request of the Grand Rapids Retail Management to LLC Gabe Shukman in seeking an amendment to the planned sign program of Celebration Village for a new urgent care building to be located at 2135 East Beltline Avenue Northeast for the following reasons. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposed planned sign program amendments would result in a more attractive aesthetic setting, improve safety, provide more convenient identification for planned users or other similar purposes, because the proposed amendments will allow signage typically permitted by the underlying East Beltline Overlay District and allow for adequate and effective signs for identification and appropriate commercial speech. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposed plan substantially furthers the purposes and intent of Section 5.15.1 because the proposed amendments would protect the need to promote new businesses within the Celebration Village development. The applicant has demonstrated the approval of the planned sign program amendments would not create any adverse impacts on one or more properties in the vicinity because the proposed amendments reinforce and support the character of the surrounding development by taking into account building scale and massing and nearby travel speeds, balance the need and right to communicate with needs to promote orderly communication, promote community aesthetics, and prevent a proliferation of signs and sign structures that can be confusing and distracting, and will ensure that signs are located, designed, constructed, installed, and maintained in a way that protects life, health, property, and the public welfare. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. 1, standard conditions set A, approvals, striking
3, 4, 5, and 7.
Thank you. And 2, that that this approval does not include signage on the south elevation or the ground sign. I'm happy to take suggestions on how to word it, but that no signs are permitted, no ground sign is permitted, and no sign on the south elevation.
all right. Do we have support? All right, support. Any final discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Our last case is 1815 and 1825 Alpine Ave Northwest.
Oops, I brought the wrong thing. Okay, the next item is 1815 and 1825 Alpine Avenue Northwest. Alpine Avenue Holdings LLC is requesting approval for an expansion of existing marijuana provisioning center and recreational cannabis retailer. The use is a special land use. The medical and recreational cannabis uses are special land uses, and so an expansion of a special land use is also a special land use. The subject property is located in the TNTCC, Transitional City Center Zone District, and the applicant
this is a better slide that shows what's there right now. The applicant is proposing a 627 square foot expansion of the existing 1,135 square foot building at 1815 Alpine. The applicant is also requesting curbside service. In your packet, the history of the approvals is included, so I won't go through that, except to say that on November 4th of last year, special land use approval was granted for the parking lot, this northern parking lot. As you can see on this slide, before the parking lot was constructed, it was on a separate lot. And the applicant did need additional parking for their use, and it is well used today. But it couldn't be combined with the main use on 1815 at that time because of separation distances between cannabis uses. There has been a lot split of another cannabis use at 701 Ann, and now that use is further away and the applicant can combine the two lots. And the applicant is planning to do that, and that will facilitate their expansion of curbside service to what is currently 1825. That is the surface parking lot. So the area that's shaded here is the addition. Right now, this is what the floor plan looks like at the top of the slide. The bottom slide shows the additional employee area, storage area, restrooms, and an exterior door, and as well as a window. The proposed elevations show the new window on the elevation, as well as the closure of the two existing windows. Staff is recommending that the two windows stay. There were, I think, some misunderstandings during plan review for this, and the floor plan was changed, and the result of that floor plan changing from the original approval is that the product is now visible from the outside. That is not compliant with both state requirements or city requirements. The two windows have some safety film on them, so that does inhibit visibility. But so there is. So it's not clear glass right now, but in order to meet the state and city requirements, the applicant is proposing to close those windows. We've discussed it, and the applicant is amenable to keeping the windows open, as they are. Staff recommends that they do be allowed to tint the windows so that you can't see from the outside, or alternatively, they could use that vinyl, what do we call that? Vinyl. They could put vinyl on the window. There's decorative vinyl, and there's vinyl that you can, so you can see out, but you can't see in. So we recommend that the windows be maintained, but some kind of treatment be used to inhibit visibility into the space. The plan has been reviewed by our SEPTED professionals on staff, and the police department and our SEPTED specialist, and they find the proposed plan to be compliant, even with the windows as proposed. The addition will result in a total of 19 parking spaces, both on the existing site and then in the parking lot. That does exceed the number of parking spaces required. This use definitely needs as many parking spaces as possible. So with the addition and slight reconfiguration of the parking lot, they've been able to eke out another space or two. Several parking spaces are intended for curbside service, 2 on the existing lot, and then 3 north of the proposed trash enclosure. And the curbside service, which is something that the state allows, and with the combination of the 2 lots could now be allowed on the northerly lot, does help somewhat mitigate traffic congestion, because it is with the online ordering and then the delivery to the vehicle, it is a quick transaction. Lastly, I'd like to mention that the West Grand Neighborhood Association has submitted a letter of support for this expansion. And I believe that's all I have. So in sum, we're looking at a special land use for a 627 square foot addition to an existing cannabis facility. Do you have any questions for me?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Questions?
Just one. So related to the curbside, that was initially allowed based on the COVID-19 pandemic. Is that something that the state it's going to sunset? Is that something that's then going to become under city control? How long do we expect that to be a thing?
So I think either the applicant or cannabis manager, Al Romero-Gabu, could answer that question.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Yes, curbside was initiated as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then now curbside is allowed in municipalities following municipal approval. The city of Grand Rapids has not prohibited the continued curbside sales. Does that make sense?
All right, no other questions for staff. I'll invite the applicant up if there are other details you'd like to share with us.
Hi, my name is Lisa Dottie. I am from JARS. As you know, we had this parking lot approved last year, which has helped us immensely. It's been a blessing to be able to now combine it, which would allow us more curbside parking spaces, because as a business practice, we are trying to become 80% e-commerce. I don't know if you've ever visited the site, have driven by. We have a major parking issue there. We have, traffic flow. It's very congested. Currently, we rent 10 parking spaces from the FOP Lodge down the road for our employees to park in. So all the parking spots you see taken are customers. So allowing the combination of the lots to be able to add more curbside spaces for quicker transactions will help us a lot. And then also just the addition on the property alone. Our employees don't have a break room right now. Our vault space is a 10 by 10 box where we have our office space, our vault. It's just, it doesn't work. So that allows us, it's really more vault space, employee space. Surprisingly, our employees haven't complained. They love working for us, but it's getting cold out. They would like a place to eat inside. And then it also, these plans were originally supposed to, I think May, we were originally supposed to go before planning. So plans have slightly changed to the floor plan. We are planning, and I don't know, we did plan to move our lobby wall back about 3 feet, which would increase our lobby space because we've had problems with people waiting outside. So yeah, that's really the extent of our request.
All right, any questions for the applicant? Okay, Thank you. I'll open up the public hearing. If you're here today about this case, please come forward and state your name and share your thoughts with us. Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, any concerns about this application?
No, it sounds like it'll improve things rather than make any issues worse. I think it's a reasonable request and support.
Any other comments? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the request of Alpine Avenue Holdings LLC to expand an existing medical marijuana provisioning center and recreational marijuana retailer at 1815 and 1825 Alpine Avenue Northwest for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will, the proposed realtor is a commercial use in a mixed-use commercial zone district. The commercial designation for the area in a master plan supports a range of commercial uses, including retail. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08.e because the changes proposed by the applicant will bring the site and building closer to compliance with the requirements of the zoning ordinance. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the existing or planned character and uses, the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment, because the proposed building and site improvements generally maintain the existing layout of the property and character of the area. The proposed site improvements would introduce green space. The proposed use will minimize potential adverse effects on the neighborhood because the applicant proposes adequate on-site parking. The GRPD has certified a SEPTED plan for the proposed use that is designed to mitigate potential crime impacts. I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Oh, I see. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic, noise, or visual clutter because immediate traffic impacts associated with the proposed use are expected to be significantly diminished over time. Excessive amounts of noise, odor, or visual disturbance are not typically associated with retailers. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment, because the character of the area in the vicinity of this property is predominantly auto-oriented, and the proposed use will not significantly change that condition. The proposed use will retain as many natural features of the landscape as practical, particularly where the natural features assist in preserving the general character of the neighborhood, because the applicant proposes to increase the amount of green space on the site by removing existing paved areas. No existing green space would be removed by the proposal. Adequate public or private infrastructure services do already exist or will be provided at no additional cost, because the proposed use seeks to reuse an existing developed property which is currently serviced by public infrastructure, and increased police and fire presence associated with the proposed use is not generally required to a greater extent than other retail commercial land uses. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or the economic welfare of the city because the proposed use is expected to generate a significant number of jobs and potential tax revenues. The proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all applicable state laws because the marijuana industry is closely regulated by both state and state regulations, and the proposed use will be subject to all such regulations. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall be, that's twice. Standard conditions set A, approvals, and B, marijuana operations as posted. Number 2, that the window treatments such as tinting or vinyl screening may be applied to the 2 existing windows on the north side of the building to prohibit the product from being visible from the outside. And number 3, that except as amended by this resolution, conditions of approval associated with PC MSLU 2019-0096 and PC-MSLU-2020-0069 shall remain in effect.
I'll support, but do we need I didn't see the marijuana, do the marijuana operations conditions apply?
I clearly didn't do a very good job on this resolution, but I didn't intend to include B because I said that as amended by this resolution, the conditions of approval associated with the previous approvals apply, which
Got it.
are
So we can-
incorporated.
We can just state that standards conditions set A apply as noted on the screen and then move on to the 2 other stated conditions.
Exactly.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Support.
All right, we have a motion and support. Any final discussion?
And item 2 implies that the windows are to not be removed.
Right, rather than them being eliminated.
Yeah, we would not exercise administrative authority to allow for those windows to be removed. So this was the compromise, is to see if the Planning Commission was comfortable with allowing a tinting instead. So you are correct.
Because there was confusion before, I wanted to make sure that was perfectly clear.
All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. I'll open up the public comment portion of the meeting and close the public comment portion of the meeting. Anything else business related?
We will not be meeting again until January, so have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
All right.
Are some of us up for?
Oh, yes, you were reappointed. Sorry, that just, sorry.
Snuck in.
Yeah.
No runoffs or anything?
My apologies for that suspense. Yes, you were all reappointed, those that were up for reappointment, so thank you. We do have 1 vacancy that will take place at the beginning of the year with Ms. Bueller's spot. I know, we were debating whether to force her back in January, but anyways, so I know that there is a potential appointment of a new commissioner. I'm not certain on the timing yet, but the mayor is aware of my ask to make it go sooner than later.
It's on the agenda for Tuesday, is what she told me today.
Okay.
And
Good.
so he would, in theory, start the first meeting in January. Anything else? All right, then we're adjourned. Thank you.